I was on a short road trip in late July, driving from Denver to a small town in Wyoming for a friend's wedding. It wasn't supposed to be a long journey, but I left late and decided to stop halfway for the night. Around 8:30 p.m., I pulled off the highway and found a modest little roadside motel. It wasn't fancy, but it looked clean enough, and I was too tired to be picky. The lobby smelled faintly of coffee and carpet cleaner. The man at the front desk was in his 40s, with a polite but distracted expression like he'd rather be anywhere else. He slid the check-in form toward me, asked for my ID, and then handed me a room key card with a dull smile. "Room 207, he said, up the stairs end of the hall. The motel had that quiet, almost too quiet atmosphere. I could hear my own footsteps echoing in the hallway as I rolled my small suitcase toward my room. Most doors I passed were shut tight. A few had flickers of TV light seeping through their edges. When I got inside, the room was simple. 2 beds, a small desk, a TV, and a bathroom tucked around a corner. I tossed my bag on the bed, plugged in my phone, and decided to head out for some food since I hadn't eaten since lunchtime. The diner down the street was nearly empty. I grabbed a burger, scrolled through my phone, and stayed there for about an hour before heading back. The parking lot was dim when I returned, only lit by 2 buzzing street lamps. A guy in a baseball cap was sitting on the curb smoking. He looked up at me as I walked past. "You're new here," he said casually. "Just passing through," I replied, trying to keep my tone friendly but short. He gave a little nod but kept watching me until I went inside. I didn't think much of it. Small towns can be like that. Still, there was something about how he kept staring that made me quicken my pace down the hallway. Inside my room, I locked the door, kicked off my shoes, and flopped onto the bed. I told myself I'd just watch something on my phone for a bit before sleeping. But before I even picked it up, I realized. The air in the room felt different. The curtains were slightly parted. I was almost sure I'd left them fully closed when I checked in. I froze for a moment, staring at that narrow slit in the curtains. It wasn't much, just an inch or 2, but it was enough for someone outside to peek in. My first thought was that maybe the housekeeping staff had come in before I checked in and just didn't close them fully. Still, the idea of someone seeing into my room while I was out didn't sit right. I walked over and yanked the curtains shut, making sure the fabric overlapped. Then I double-checked the lock on the door and the chain latch. Everything seemed fine. I lay back on the bed, scrolling through my phone, trying to push the thought away. But after about 20 minutes, I heard it. 3 soft taps against the glass. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up instantly, heart pounding. The window was behind the curtains, just a few feet from the bed. I held my breath, straining to listen, but there was nothing else. No footsteps, no voices. Cautiously, I stood and pulled the curtain just enough to peek out. The parking lot below was dim, and I couldn't see anyone near my window. A car passed on the road, headlights sweeping over the lot for a brief second, then darkness again. I told myself maybe it was just the building settling, or maybe a tree branch brushing against the glass. But when I stepped back from the window, I noticed something else. My suitcase zipper was halfway open. I hadn't touched it since I'd come back from the diner. I walked over and checked inside. Everything was still there, except my toiletries bag, which had been in the top compartment. I found it sitting on the desk, unzipped, with the contents scattered. That's when I felt it. Someone had been in my room. I grabbed my phone, debating whether to call the front desk, when I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. This time the sound wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from the bathroom. I stood completely still, staring at the closed bathroom door. The light was off inside, and the room was dead quiet now. My mind was racing. Was it the pipes? Maybe water dripping? I took a slow step toward it, my bare feet silent against the thin motel carpet. My hand hovered over the knob, but I didn't touch it right away. Instead, I pressed my ear against the door. Nothing. Finally, I turned the handle and pushed it open. The light flickered on with a faint buzz from the old fixture. The sink, the shower, the toilet, everything looked exactly the same as when I'd last been in there. No sign of anyone. But when I looked down, my stomach tightened. My toothbrush was in the sink basin, wet. I hadn't brushed my teeth yet. I backed out slowly, leaving the door open. My eyes went straight to the deadbolt on the main door. It was still locked from the inside. There was no way someone could have gotten in, unless they never left. That's when a new sound hit me, an almost imperceptible creak like a floorboard shifting. It came from the corner of the room, near the small closet. I grabbed my phone, thumb ready on the emergency dial. With my other hand, I pulled the closet door open in one quick motion. Empty. But then, from somewhere above me, I heard it. Soft, steady breathing. I tilted my head back. In the ceiling above the closet was a square panel, slightly ajar. My mouth went dry. The panel wasn't just loose, it was tilted open just enough for someone to peek through. I took a slow step back, never breaking eye contact with that gap. "Hello?" I said, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. No response. The breathing stopped. I kept my phone up, started recording, and zoomed in. In the dim light, I could barely make it out, but there was something pale up there. Not an object. Skin. I stumbled backward, fumbling for my bag. My plan was to grab my stuff and get out, but halfway to the door I froze. If I unlocked it, they might hear and come down before I could escape. Then the panel shifted, just slightly, but enough to hear the wood scrape against the frame. Whoever was up there was moving. That snapped me into action. I yanked the deadbolt, flung the door open, and sprinted down the hallway barefoot. My heart was hammering so hard I thought I'd black out. At the front desk, the night clerk looked up in shock as I blurted out what happened. He grabbed a flashlight and marched down the hall with me, trailing behind, shaking. When we got back to my room, the door was still open, lights still on, but the closet panel was now shut tight. The clerk stood on a chair, pushed it open, and shined the light inside. The crawl space was empty. At least, that's what he said. I didn't climb up to see for myself. I left my key on the counter, walked straight out into the night, and didn't stop until I was back in my car. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Just for a second, in the faint yellow glow of the motel sign, I could swear I saw someone watching from the second-floor window, the same room I had just left. I'd been working doubles at the diner for months, half by choice, half because I didn't know what else to do with myself. My brother had been on me about getting out of town, taking a break, seeing something that isn't a coffee pot. I brushed him off until Katie brought it up too. She'd been my friend since high school, the kind you drift away from for years but somehow end up circling back to. "This place is eating you alive," she'd said one night after closing. "Let's go somewhere cheap. No planning, no expectations, just leave for a weekend." We decided on a 2-night trip to a lakeside town a few hours north. She found an old motel online, vintage charm according to the listing, with faded photos of a brick building and an old neon vacancy sign. The drive was quiet at first, just music and the steady hum of the road. We talked more after the first gas stop, about the people we used to know, about jobs we didn't like, about how both of us seemed stuck. By the time we hit the 2-lane highway cutting through pine woods, I was actually starting to feel lighter. We got to town just before sunset, but when we pulled into the motel lot, something felt hollow. There were maybe 4 cars, all parked far apart, and no movement anywhere. The main office was lit by one dim lamp, and behind the counter was a guy in his late 40s, wearing a tucked-in polo with no name tag. He didn't greet us, just slid a clipboard toward me and asked for a signature. No small talk, no "enjoy your stay," nothing. Our room was at the far end, facing a row of vending machines and a stretch of empty woods. Inside, the air smelled faintly like bleach and something else, stale maybe. 1 queen bed, a low dresser, and a sliding glass door with curtains that didn't quite meet in the middle. Katie laughed and said, "Well, it's not the Ritz." But I noticed she locked the door twice. That night, I was woken by the sound of a car idling outside. When I peeked through the curtain gap, A dark sedan was parked directly in front of our room. The driver's face was hidden in shadow, but they didn't get out. They just sat there, engine running, for what felt like forever. I didn't wake Katie. I figured if it was something, I'd deal with it, and if it was nothing, I didn't want to freak her out. After maybe 10 minutes, the sedan rolled away, its taillights disappearing down the empty road. In the morning, she was scrolling through her phone over instant coffee when I mentioned it. She frowned. "You think it was the manager?" "I don't know. No reason to just sit there," I said. She shrugged, but I could tell she didn't like it. We spent the day walking around the lake, which looked prettier online. A few boarded-up bait shops, a cafe with flickering lights, and a souvenir store selling keychains from the 90s. Still, it was nice to just be away. Back at the motel that evening, we saw the same sedan parked near the office. This time, a tall man in a windbreaker was leaning against it, talking to the manager. Both stopped and looked at us when we got out of the car. Not casual glances, just still stares, like they'd been waiting. Later, while Katie was in the shower, someone knocked on our door. Soft, just 3 taps. I assumed it was her until I remembered she was still inside. I opened it a crack. The man from the sedan was there. "You dropped this earlier," he said, holding out a folded piece of paper. I took it automatically, muttering thanks. But when I unfolded it, it was blank. Before I could say anything, he was already walking away, hands in pockets. Katie came out, towel over her shoulders, asking who it was. I told her some guy, wrong room, and stuffed the paper into my bag. But the truth was, my hands were shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound felt closer than it should. A TV in another room, footsteps outside. Around 2 a.m., I gave up, pulled on a hoodie, and went to the vending machines for water. The lot was empty except for the sedan. The driver's seat was reclined, but I swear I saw movement. I turned toward the machines, pretending I hadn't noticed. That's when I saw something taped to ours. It was a photo of our room's sliding door, taken from outside. I yanked it off and shoved it in my pocket, looking around. The sedan's door was slightly open now. I hurried back inside, locking everything, including the bathroom window. In the morning, I convinced Katie to leave a day early, told her I wasn't feeling great. She didn't argue. But when I went to check out, the manager just stared at me, smiling too long. He didn't ask why we were leaving. On the way to the car, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The sedan was gone, but our tire was almost flat. Not enough to keep us from driving, but enough to be dangerous if it got worse. Katie wanted to ask for help from the office, but I told her no. We'd find a gas station. We drove in tense silence until we hit a small station on the highway. I went inside to pay, and while I was there, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was the same photo of our sliding door, only now Katie's silhouette was visible inside. I didn't tell her about the text. I just said we should keep driving and maybe skip stopping until we got home. A few hours later, Katie noticed a car in the rear view. Dark sedan, same shape, same tinted windows. Coincidence, I said, even though my chest felt like it was tightening with every mile. We finally pulled into a busy rest stop. I figured if we were surrounded by people, whoever it was would give up. We grabbed food, sat by the window. When I looked out toward the lot, the sedan was parked in a far corner. The driver's door was open this time, but no one was inside. We left before finishing our food. I drove faster than I should have, watching the mirrors constantly. The sedan didn't follow us out. I started to think maybe it was just my nerves, until we got back to my apartment that night. On my welcome mat was an envelope. Inside were 3 photos. The first was of our motel room. The second was of Katie at the vending machine. The third was of me, taken from behind, as I unlocked my apartment door. Katie moved 2 states away a month later. She said it was for work, but we both knew better. I changed my locks, but some nights I still think I hear a car idling outside. I never check. 3 years ago, I drove from Austin to Tulsa for a small business expo. It wasn't a huge deal, just a side gig I'd been working on. But it was the first time I was traveling completely alone for work. The drive was longer than I thought it'd be. Traffic outside Dallas slowed me down, and by the time I crossed into Oklahoma, the sun was already dipping low. My plan had been to check into a mid-range hotel near the expo center, but when I got there, they told me they were completely booked. Apparently there was some sports tournament in town that weekend. After a few calls, I found another place, the Redwood Motor Lodge, about 10 minutes away. The photos online looked decent enough. When I arrived, it was less than what I expected. The building was a 2-story U-shape around a cracked parking lot. The neon sign flickered, half the letters burned out. Still, the front desk clerk was polite enough. A woman in her 40s with a raspy voice and a name tag that read, Cheryl. I paid for 2 nights, got a plastic key card, and rolled my small suitcase to the second floor. The room was nothing fancy. 1 queen bed, a desk, an old TV. But it seemed clean, and honestly, I was too tired to care. I unpacked, set my laptop on the desk, and spent a couple hours answering emails before heading out to grab dinner. When I returned a little before 9 p.m., the hallways were quiet. A group of guys in work boots were smoking by the stairs, but they didn't say anything to me. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and immediately noticed a faint smell, like stale cologne mixed with something musky. I figured it was just the last guest's scent lingering, so I tossed my bag down and started to kick my shoes off. That's when I heard something. A faint shuffle from the far side of the bed. I froze, thinking maybe I'd left the TV on earlier. But the TV was off. I took 1 step forward, and a man stood up from the space between the bed and the wall. The guy was in his mid-30s, maybe older. Short hair, dark hoodie, jeans. He didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, he just blinked a few times, like I'd walked in earlier than he expected. "What the hell are you doing in my room?" I blurted, my voice higher than I meant. He didn't answer. He just stepped out from the gap, moving slowly toward me. His eyes didn't leave mine, but there was no real expression on his face. I instinctively backed up until I was pressed against the door. My hand fumbled for the handle. "Hey," I said. I started, but he suddenly took 2 quick steps toward me. That was enough. I yanked the door open and bolted into the hallway, my sneakers squeaking on the carpet. I didn't look back until I was halfway to the front desk. When I reached the lobby, Cheryl looked up from her phone, startled. "What happened?" "There's some guy in my room," I said, pointing upstairs. My breathing was uneven, my hands still shaking. She stood up fast. "Stay here, I'm calling the police." Within 10 minutes, 2 officers arrived. They went up to my room while I stayed in the lobby. Cheryl kept glancing toward the stairs, but neither of us saw him come down. When the cops returned, they told me the room was empty. No sign of the man I'd described. They searched the building, including the stairwells and side exits. Nothing. They asked if anything was missing. I said no, but the thought that he might have been in there earlier while I was unpacking made my skin crawl. One officer suggested I could be moved to another room or even another hotel for the night. But it was late, I was exhausted, and Cheryl assured me she'd rekey the door immediately. I let them do it. The cops left after filing their report, and Cheryl handed me a new key card with a firm, "Lock the deadbolt." For the next hour, I sat at the desk pretending to work on my laptop, but every sound in the hallway made me flinch. Around 11 p.m., I stood by the window, staring at the dimly lit parking lot below. And that's when I saw him, walking slowly along the row of cars, his hands in his hoodie pocket, head tilted slightly toward my building. My first thought was that it couldn't be him. Maybe my brain was just putting the same hoodie and stance on some random guest. But then he stopped under the yellow glow of a street lamp, and I saw his face clearly. Same sharp jawline, same hollow stare. He didn't look up at my window, not directly, but his head turned just enough that I could tell he knew exactly where I was. I stepped back from the glass, letting the curtain fall. My heart was pounding again, and every instinct told me to call the police. But what was I going to say? Yeah, the guy from earlier is in the parking lot. He hasn't done anything, but I don't like it. I sat back at the desk, trying to focus on my laptop screen, but my eyes kept flicking toward the window. 5 minutes later, curiosity got the better of me. I peeked out again. He was gone. I told myself to relax. Maybe he'd left. I even turned the TV on for background noise. That's when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Hello? Silence for a moment. Then a voice. Low, almost casual. Why'd you run earlier? My mouth went dry. Who is this? You left the door wide open, he said like it was some kind of inside joke. That's not safe. I hung up immediately and blocked the number. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I checked the deadbolt and the door chain, both locked. Then I sat on the bed, staring at the crack under the door. I could hear faint footsteps in the hallway outside, slow and heavy. They stopped right outside my room. For what felt like a full minute, there was no movement, no sound except the hum of the air conditioner. Then the footsteps started again, fading toward the far end of the hall. I didn't sleep. I just sat there until I saw the first hint of daylight through the curtains. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was safer to leave than stay another night. The expo didn't start until the afternoon, but I packed everything before 8 a.m. and carried my bag downstairs. Cheryl was at the desk again, sipping coffee. I told her I'd be checking out early. She didn't ask why, just slid a receipt across the counter and gave me a tight smile. As I walked toward my car, the lot was quiet, except for the distant hum of a delivery truck. I unlocked the door, tossed my bag in the passenger seat and started the engine. That's when I saw him. He was leaning against the side of the building near the back exit, hands in his hoodie pocket, staring straight at me. No smirk, no nod, just that flat, unreadable look. I froze, one hand still on the gear shift. For a moment it felt like we were both waiting to see who'd move first. Then, without breaking eye contact, he reached into his pocket and pulled out my hotel key card. The one Cheryl had given me after the police came. I didn't even think. I slammed the car into reverse, backed out of the space, and pulled onto the street without looking back. My heart was racing so hard I barely noticed the red lights I blew through on the way out of town. It wasn't until I stopped at a gas station 20 miles away that I finally let myself breathe. I sat there for a while, telling myself it was over, that I'd never see him again. But when I popped open my glove box to grab a map, a folded piece of paper slid out. In shaky block letters it read, "You forgot to lock the window." I hadn't planned on stopping in Westbrook. It was one of those towns you pass through without remembering the name, the kind that lives entirely between highway exits. But after 7 hours of driving toward nowhere in particular, the rain came down so hard my wipers might as well have been made of cardboard. The trip wasn't a vacation, it was an escape. I'd quit my marketing job 2 weeks earlier in a way that burned every bridge I had left. A group email, too many truths, no real plan after. My phone kept buzzing with texts from old coworkers and my ex, all wanting explanations I didn't have. I told myself I'd drive until I stopped feeling like I was still in that office. I saw the Evergreen Lodge sign through the blur of rain. It wasn't much, a 2-story rectangle with a row of exterior doors, the paint peeling in strips, the parking lot shining under the streetlights like black ice. The man at the front desk didn't introduce himself. He just slid a clipboard toward me, said room 14, and asked for cash. He didn't make eye contact until I counted the bills. Then he smiled too wide, like he'd been waiting for that part. Inside, room 14 smelled like old carpet and lemon cleaner. A TV from the 90s sat crooked on a stand. The bedspread was stiff, patterned with green leaves that didn't match the curtains. But what I noticed most was the window, not the size or the view, but the fact that it was open an inch, rain blowing in. I shut it, locked it, and told myself I was imagining the faint smell of cigarette smoke that lingered after. Around 10 p.m., while I was scrolling through my phone, someone walked past my door slowly. Their footsteps didn't match the casual shuffle of another guest. They were measured, pausing every few seconds. I waited for them to keep going. They didn't. The steps stopped right outside. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe someone looking for the ice machine. But then came the knock. 3 short taps, spaced just enough to feel intentional. "Yeah?" I called out. No answer. I looked through the peephole. A man in a black windbreaker stood there, head slightly down so I couldn't see his face. I froze. He didn't move. Didn't knock again. After maybe 30 seconds, he turned and walked away toward the far end of the lot. The front desk was locked when I went to check. Through the glass, I saw the counter light still on, but no one inside. When I came back to my room, there was something folded under the door. I picked it up. A sheet of lined paper with my name written on it in block letters. Nothing else. I didn't sleep much. Every car that passed outside made me check the curtains. In the morning, my phone had no signal, though it had been fine the day before. The lobby was still empty, but a styrofoam cup of coffee sat on the counter, steam rising like it had just been poured. I decided I'd leave after breakfast, but when I got to my car, the driver's side tire was low. Not flat, just low enough that I'd have to stop before getting back on the highway. I didn't see the man in the windbreaker, but I noticed the door to room 12 was wide open, the lights off inside. I found a gas station a few miles down the road, filled the tire, and bought a coffee. The cashier, a thin woman with a cigarette behind her ear, glanced at the motel receipt I pulled from my pocket when I went to pay. "You stayed there last night?" she asked. "Yeah, why?" She just shook her head. "That place has been trouble for years. They don't get many guests twice." I wanted to ask more, but the way she looked at me, like I'd already made a mistake, shut me up. Back in the car, I noticed my phone had 1 bar of service. A text came through from an unknown number. "You left the window open." I pulled over, heart hammering. The message had no timestamp, like it had been queued for hours. I knew the window had been shut. I'd locked it myself. I didn't drive straight home. I took the long way, switching highways twice. Still, in my rearview mirror, I kept catching glimpses of a dark sedan a few cars back. It never followed directly, but every time I changed roads, it seemed to reappear. By the time I got to a busy truck stop, I felt half sick. I went inside to grab food, and when I came back, there was another folded paper under my wiper blade. This one just said 14. I didn't go back to the motel, but I didn't go home either. Some part of me felt like if I went back to my apartment, whoever it was would know exactly where I slept. I checked into another place. Chain hotel, bright lobby, people everywhere. But that night, as I was drifting off, my phone buzzed. Another text from the same number. Better room this time. I didn't reply. The next morning, the sedan was in the far corner of the parking lot facing my window. The driver's seat was empty. I went to the front desk, asked if they'd noticed anyone hanging around. The clerk shook her head. "We've got cameras, though. Want me to pull footage?" I said yes, but an hour later she came back, frowning. "Nothing on your floor from last night. Not even you coming back to your room." I checked out without asking questions, drove west until the sun went down, kept going until it came back up. That was 6 months ago. I've changed numbers twice, pay cash, stay moving. But every so often, I'll wake in a roadside room and see a folded paper under the door before I even touch the light switch. Sometimes it has nothing on it. Sometimes it just says the number of the room I'm in. Two summers ago, I was driving from Des Moines to Denver for a friend's wedding. I'd planned it out so I could make the whole trip in one day, but a huge accident on the interstate set me back by hours. By the time the road cleared, it was late, and I was still 4 hours from Denver. I considered sleeping in my car at a rest stop, but my back already ached from driving, so I decided to find a motel. I pulled off into a small town I'd never heard of. Looked like it had one gas station, a diner, and a strip of old businesses. Just beyond that was a faded sign. Bluebird Motor Inn, vacancy. The place had 2 floors, each room facing the parking lot. The siding was peeling, and some of the balcony railings looked crooked, but it was late and I was tired. I got a ground floor room at the far end, right next to the ice machine. Inside, the room smelled faintly like bleach and cigarettes. But the bed looked clean, the AC worked, and the bathroom had actual hot water. I showered, changed into a t-shirt and shorts, and flipped through channels until my eyes started to close. I had just set my phone down when I heard a faint tap at the window. At first I thought maybe it was just the ice machine making noise, but then it came again. 3 slow knocks like someone testing if I was awake. I pulled back the curtain just an inch. A man stood a few feet from my window. Mid-40s maybe, wiry build, wearing a stained baseball cap. His head was tilted down, but I could see him smiling. Before I could even ask what he wanted, he said, "Your door's unlocked." His voice was low, like he was sharing a secret. I didn't answer. I just dropped the curtain and went to check the deadbolt. It was locked. Then came a knock at the actual door. I called out, "You need to leave," trying to sound firm, but my voice cracked a little. Silence. Then slow footsteps, like he was walking away. I sat back on the bed, phone in hand, trying to shake off the adrenaline. A few minutes passed, then my phone lit up. Unknown number. The text read, "Why'd you lock it?" I froze, my thumb hovering over the screen. I hadn't given my number to anyone since I got here. My mind raced. Did I accidentally leave something with my info at the front desk? I didn't reply. A second text came. "We could have hung out." I turned the volume all the way down, shut off the TV, and sat in the dark listening. 5 minutes later, footsteps again, this time heavier, closer. Something scraped lightly along the door, like metal against metal. I tiptoed to the peephole. He was there, crouched low, his face almost pressed to the door. His other hand was messing with something near the lock. I backed up, heart pounding. That's when the ice machine roared to life, startling me so bad I almost screamed. When I looked again, he was gone. Or so I thought. Through the curtain gap, I could see the shadow of his legs. He was standing just out of sight of the door, waiting. I grabbed my keys and wallet, figuring I could make a run for my car if I timed it right. My phone buzzed again. "If you open it now, I won't be mad." That was enough for me. I dialed 911 and whispered to the dispatcher what was happening. She told me to stay inside and stay quiet. Officers were 5 minutes out. I pressed my back against the far wall, staring at the door. A minute later, there was a loud rattle at the handle. Then harder, more frantic. "Hey, I just want to talk," he shouted, banging hard enough to shake the frame. Then just as suddenly, it stopped. I waited, breath held, until I heard the faint wail of sirens. The lights swept through the parking lot and 2 officers jumped out. But by the time they reached my door, the man was gone. They walked the property, checked the cameras. Nothing. No clear shots of him, no sign of forced entry. One officer told me it was probably just some drunk guy. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, as I was loading my bags into the car, I noticed something scratched into the paint on my driver's door. It said, "Next time." I had just finished a long 2-day drive from Denver to San Diego for a short work project. The company was covering the hotel, but I picked a cheaper place so I could pocket a little extra per diem money. It wasn't fancy at all. 2 floors, outdoor hallways, and a little pool in the middle that was closed for maintenance, but looked more like it had been empty for months. The front desk clerk was polite, but barely looked up when I came in. My room was on the ground floor, way in the back corner, which I didn't mind. I like quiet, and it meant less foot traffic. I unpacked a bit, ordered some takeout, and planned to just watch TV before bed. The first night was fine, except when I went out to grab my food from the delivery guy. I noticed a man standing by the soda machine a few doors down. He wasn't using it, just there. Tall, maybe late 30s, wearing a faded baseball cap pulled low. He didn't say anything, but I could feel him looking at me as I passed. I chalked it up to him just being another guest who was bored. The next morning, I went to the motel's breakfast area. It was small, maybe 6 tables total. I was pouring coffee when I noticed the same man sitting by the window staring in my direction. At first I thought I was imagining it, so I looked away. But every time I glanced back, his head didn't move. He wasn't eating, just sitting with an empty cup in front of him. I sat down at a table and tried to focus on my phone. After a few minutes, I decided to leave early. As I walked past him, his eyes followed me all the way to the door. No smile, no nod, just that blank, fixed look. At that point, I figured maybe he was just socially awkward. I didn't know yet that this wouldn't be the last time I'd see him that day. That afternoon, I left for my first client meeting, which was about 30 minutes away. The day went fine, and I didn't get back to the motel until after dark. The parking lot was quiet, except for a flickering streetlight near the vending machines. As I walked toward my room, I noticed something off. The man from breakfast was leaning against the railing of the second floor directly above my door. He wasn't smoking, talking on the phone, or doing anything, just standing there staring at the parking lot. When I unlocked my door, I could feel him watching me. I closed it quickly and locked the deadbolt. A minute later, I heard slow footsteps above, pacing back and forth. They'd stop for a while, then start again. I turned on the TV, trying to drown out the sound, but after maybe 20 minutes, there was a knock at my door. Not loud, just 3 slow taps. "Yeah?" I called out, but no one answered. I looked through the peephole. The walkway outside was empty. That night I slept badly. Every time I woke up, I'd hear faint noises outside. The metallic creak of the railing, the soft thud of someone walking past my door. The next morning I left earlier than planned just to get some fresh air and coffee somewhere else. When I came back around lunchtime, the man was sitting on the curb near the back lot. My car was parked only a few spaces away, and as I got out, he lifted his head and gave me this slow, strange smile. "Morning," he said. It wasn't morning anymore, but I just mumbled "hey" and walked past him. As I put my key card in the door, I realized he wasn't sitting there when I'd first pulled in. It was starting to feel less like coincidence and more like he was keeping track of me. That evening, I was back in my room, half watching TV while answering emails. The curtains were drawn and the door was locked. I kept telling myself I was overthinking it, that maybe the guy was just another guest with nothing better to do. Around 9 p.m., I heard movement outside again, soft, uneven footsteps passing my door, then stopping. I muted the TV and sat still. A few seconds later, I saw a shadow fall across the thin gap under the door. Whoever it was, they were standing right there. Then, a folded piece of paper slid underneath. I froze. The paper just sat there for a moment before the shadow shifted and the footsteps moved away. My heart was pounding. I stared at it for a good 30 seconds before picking it up. Inside, written in blocky handwriting, were just 4 words. "You leave tomorrow, right?" I felt my stomach drop. There was no name, no room number, nothing, just that question. I grabbed my phone and thought about calling the front desk, but then I realized I'd never seen anyone there except for the night clerk, and he barely looked up from his computer the one time I'd checked in. Instead, I shoved the note into my bag, double-checked the locks, and sat on the bed with my phone in my hand. Around midnight, I finally fell asleep, only to wake up an hour later to the faint sound of someone trying my door handle. It stopped after 2 clicks, but I didn't sleep again for the rest of the night. By morning, I knew I needed to decide, cut my stay short or stick it out. I decided to leave. Whatever was going on here, it wasn't worth finding out the hard way. I packed fast, shoving everything into my bag without folding. My plan was simple: grab my key, drop it at the front desk, and get the hell out before whoever had been bothering me noticed. But when I opened my door, I froze. Propped up against the wall across the hallway was a chair, positioned directly facing my door. No one was sitting in it. I scanned the hall. Empty. I locked my room and headed for the front desk, my footsteps echoing on the thin carpet. When I turned the corner, I stopped again. The desk was empty. No clerk, no sign of anyone. Just the low hum of a vending machine in the corner. I rang the little silver bell. Silence. After a moment, I set the key on the counter and turned to leave. That's when I saw it. A folded note sitting by the register, with my name written in thick black ink. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Inside, in the same blocky handwriting as before, was a single sentence. See you next time. The front doors opened automatically as I stepped outside, but in the reflection of the glass, I swear I saw a man leaning against the wall behind me, smiling. When I spun around, the hallway was empty. I didn't stop driving until I was 3 towns away,